Welcome to the Dump and Chase podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Robillard, with you as always. Before we get into my interview with Rob, man, I just wanted to say thank you guys all for the support recently, and make sure to follow us on all of our socials down in the description. You can find us on anywhere you find your podcasts, and pretty much any social media, to be honest. I think I've covered all bases with the social medias. As well, we might have some news coming up later, maybe not in the week, but in the coming weeks for sure, with the podcast and maybe adding another show, maybe something else, but stay tuned for that. Maybe we'll have some old members of the podcast back. Who knows? That's just kind of a sneak peek there. But yeah, stay tuned. Make sure to turn on post notifications, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and yeah, look forward to all that. All right, without further ado, don't want to keep you guys for too long. Here's my interview with Rob Mahon, the Brandon Wheat Kings play-by-play announcer.
Well, first off, how's it going?
Well, it's going pretty well, thanks. Thanks for reaching out. How you doing?
Of course. Good. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, no problem.
All right. First off, how did you get started doing play-by-play, and was it something you always wanted to do? And how did it kind of just come about for you?
It had always been an idea I had, but I sort of backed into actually doing it. I was working as a junior reporter with the Manitoba Bisons. I was covering the hockey teams there. And the press box at the University of Manitoba at the time was pretty cramped, so I could just look to my right and see somebody was doing a webcast. And I asked them, well, do you have an opening for one more guy to do that? Can I hop on next week? And they said, yeah, sure, give it a shot. And I called my first game, a women's hockey game in, I think it would have been November of 2014. Got on the mic and just fell head over heels with it immediately. It was like, oh yeah, this is it right here. This is what I want to do. So from there, I just kept on doing the Bison games all through college and eventually hunted down an actual job.
I was just going to ask you how long have you been doing play-by-play, but obviously since then. What kind of made you want to work in the world of sports and cover hockey?
Well, I'd been obsessed with the game from a young age, and I think it was pretty clear pretty early that I wasn't going to make a living playing it. The skills weren't there on a number of fronts. Let's just say that, as my coaches at the time would tell you. But I had a feeling that I might be able to do something with it as far as public speaking was concerned. I was lucky enough that the school I attended at the time had a pretty good debating program and public speaking program. So I was discovering as I went that I was pretty comfortable talking in front of crowds. And I thought, well, I love sports so much and I love hockey so much that it just makes sense to kind of combine the two things and see where that takes me.
Yeah, same for me. I was a goalie growing up, but obviously my skills aren't as there as some others need to be. But yeah, I was going to ask you as well. Obviously, did you have somewhat of a playing career? Like, when did you play up till? Like, when did you kind of quit almost, I guess?
It's funny. I still play. It's rec hockey now. No one's winning any awards that matter in the leagues that I play in. But my last year of contact hockey, I was playing relatively low division high school hockey in Winnipeg, and I blew out my MCL and ACL in one shot when someone slid into me. So that was kind of the end of my contact hockey career. I kind of miss it sometimes. I was a reasonably good sized kid. I like to throw my weight around, and I miss the contact sometimes, but I think I've accepted at this point that me and contact hockey are no longer a mix.
Yeah, it's hard to give up for sure. Like, it's something that you always kind of like look towards or like thrive for, like that competitiveness, and you can never really like fill it as much as you want to.
Yeah, exactly. And when I was a kid, the guys that I enjoyed watching, I was a Colorado Avalanche fan growing up in Winnipeg. We didn't have the Jets when I was younger, so everyone pretty much had their own favorite teams from somewhere else. And the Avs of that time, Joe Sakic and Peter Forsberg, were idols for sure. But that blue line at various times had Rob Blake, Adam Foote, Darius Kasparaitis was there for a bit. And those were the guys that I remember loving watching growing up. I couldn't hit like Rob Blake to save my life. And believe me, I tried. But it was a lot of fun growing up watching guys play that style. And I tried to copy it to limited success.
Yeah. Ron Hextall was kind of my idol growing up, going back to the Wheat Kings as well. But because my dad and just that kind of was what I played like. I was kind of like that gritty goaltender that nobody really liked to play against. But yeah, it's funny how like you kind of implement your game after another player that you grew up watching.
Yeah, as I got older, I realized that the Rob Blake hits weren't working out, and I also realized that I didn't have the hands to score from outside the circle. So my last few years of contact hockey, the best thing I would do to help the team score would be to park myself in front of the net and just take abuse. And sometimes I would draw penalties that way. Sometimes I'd redirect pucks that way. But I did hate playing against goalies like that because they always got away with it. If a defenseman hacked me in the legs, he was going to the box.
Yeah.
If a goalie did it, the refs would assume that I had done something to deserve it.
Yeah. Going back to the Wheat Kings, I know you haven't been with the Wheat Kings for very long. I think you're going on year 3 now, or are you in year 2?
I'm in year 2, and as my contract holds, year 3 next year.
So how did you kind of land the position you're in now?
So I had bounced around a little bit. Right out of college, I went and worked with a junior A program in Saskatchewan with the Estevan Bruins. And from there, I got work with the Prince Albert Raiders, also in the WHL. But I'm a Winnipeg kid, born and raised. And while I really enjoyed my time in Prince Albert and still do have friends and contacts there, when the Wheat Kings job opened up after my second year with the Raiders, I thought, well, this is the opportunity I have to be, A, the closest I've been to home and my family in 6 years, and B, this is a chance to work for the team that I very early on in my broadcasting career saw live and kind of instilled in me this love of junior hockey to begin with. So it was kind of an opportunity to, on both a personal and professional level, move forward. And I couldn't resist. I threw my name into the hat. And I guess, the Wheat Kings and Raiders play each other 6 or 8 times a year. So the Wheat Kings staff were pretty familiar with my work. They liked it, obviously, enough to bring me in. And here I still am.
Yeah, that's awesome. For people that kind of don't know, like, how does your travel work as a play-by-play announcer? Like, are you traveling on the bus with the team, or how do you get to point A to point B?
The travel with play-by-play is actually really simple, even if it is pretty long. I get on the bus. I've got a seat on the bus. The radio gear and all my luggage come with me, and away we go. And sometimes that means, a 3-hour jaunt up the road to Regina or Moose Jaw. Other times it means a 12-hour bus ride to Red Deer, and you're bringing all manner of a week's worth of clothes and so forth with you. So sometimes it's a really long process, but it is very simple. I don't even have to really think. I get on the bus and I go where it takes me.
Yeah, I guess it's not as in depth as a player. You gotta get your naps in. You gotta focus on a bunch of stuff, and it's not as simple
I
as.
still get my naps in.
Well, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think we're gonna do the road trip to Red Deer, and then Edmonton, and then I don't know if you start in Calgary or finish off in Calgary this year, but
we end there this time around. Yeah. So on Sunday, I think it's March 9th.
That's
my dates are all out of whack, but we've got a matinee in Calgary that day, and that's it's kind of a tough one to end on because the Hitmen are kind of the showdown of that trip. They're such a good team right now that you don't want to get them when you're road weary, but sometimes you have no choice.
Yeah, it's crazy how much they've kind of turned things around, like especially from last year. Obviously, I watched them a lot in Calgary, and just the difference between this year and last year, it's like ridiculous. Like the improvements they've made over even since the trade deadline and what they're pushing for, it's pretty incredible.
They moved very quickly once they decided what they knew was going to be the plan this year. And I got to give them credit. When you commit to something like going all in, it does nobody any good to do half measures. Like if you're going to give up prospects and picks and then stop yourself halfway through, you're kind of left in this tweener position where you're hurting yourself in both the present and future. The Wheat Kings decided to go not exactly the other way this year, but they decided that rather than load up, they would hang on to some of the draft picks they'd accumulated. So they've got an extra first and an extra second round pick in the coming draft. The Hitmen went completely the other direction and decided to just go full bore, and they've completely changed around their roster from the start of the year. I mean, they've added a couple of World Junior guys. They almost added a third. They've been really, really busy on the trade front, and I think they've decided that this is their window. They want to win this year. I know with Oliver Tulk moving on to the NCAA next year, you can see some of the impetus for that. And of course, Carter Yakimchuk is an NHL draft pick. He's almost certainly gone for the pros next year too. So they decided this was their year, and full credit to the Hitmen. Once they decided that, they put their full weight behind that decision, and it looks like it's going pretty well for them.
Yeah. You mentioned the NCAA and kind of like the transfer window that's kind of started over the last few months. What are your thoughts kind of like on that idea as a whole, like with the mix of the NCAA and the CHL now?
I said to a friend of mine when it first happened, this was like finding out that gravity didn't exist. Like this was such a fundamental law of junior hockey through my entire career in broadcasting to this point. Junior A kids go NCAA, WHL kids go to USports for the pros. That was just that simple of a dividing line. And to have that line suddenly vanish was such a strange feeling. That said, as much as coaches are still trying to figure out what this will actually mean and what impact it's going to have long term, one thing pretty much everybody agrees on is this is going to be better for the players. If you get a player, say a late round draft pick, who needs that extra time of development, but who can't really get it in major junior because once you get to that 20-year-old spot, you're done there and you're almost certainly going pro if you're drafted. Maybe you need a little extra time before you're ready to play against grown men, and 2 or 3 years in college, or even 4, if that's what you need, that's good for player development. And I think everybody from the players through the coaches, while they're still negotiating and navigating certain elements of this, they will all tell you that as far as player development is concerned, and that's ultimately what everybody's in the business for, this is going to be good for the kids.
Yeah. And I mean, before all this, I mean, it was divided, like you get 4 years in college and then you get less time, like teams get less time to decide if they're going to hand you a contract in like the CHL and stuff. So it's less of a window, but I guess for later round picks, it now opens up more potential to eventually get an entry level contract or even just a free agent contract later down the line.
Yeah, and the free agent contract down the line is a big one too, because you're playing a bit of a different circuit from USports. I will go to bat for USports and call it an extremely underrated league, but there are elements of it that the NCAA has outdone in terms of moving players onto the pros, not only in terms of quality of competition, like the best NCAA teams tend to be loaded with NHL draft picks, but also in terms of the schedule. A USports team going through a full season will play, unless they go all the way to the finals, probably not more than 30 games. Whereas an NCAA team, you're pretty well guaranteed you're going to get more than that. And you're getting it against players that are at a slightly, on average, higher level of competition. Like I said, USports have been criminally underrated these past few years. I remember when the University of Alberta would go south to play NCAA Division I teams, they'd win more than they'd lose. But you're dealing with older players at that point. And I think the ability to have 4 years in college will probably help players get to the pros a little bit more readily than 4 years in USports.
Yeah. I, for one, don't really pay attention to USports. It's kind of just WHL for me. Like, I've never really been too involved with USports, but I mean, obviously they have great programs and they're really strong develop. I can't say if they're underrated or not, but obviously I'll take your word for it. But I believe Logan Thompson, for example, he came out of USports and he's thriving in the NHL. I can't think of any other examples, but obviously
Joel Ward was kind of for a lot of years, Joel Ward and Derek Ryan were the two that people always came back to. Logan Thompson, obviously in recent years, is now going to be the big one, but Ward and Ryan were kind of the two guys that everybody talked about.
Yeah. I mean, I'll ask you this now. How would you rank WHL compared to other leagues in the CHL in regards to competitiveness and development? I, for one, think the WHL, like you for USports, I think the WHL is one of the more underappreciated in that regard towards development. Obviously, there's probably a little bit of a bias there as I watch a lot more WHL games, but also, I don't know how well you pay attention to the other leagues, but I kind of just wanted to get your thoughts on that as a whole.
That one seems to go in phases. You get the right phase, and you'll get a lot of kids coming out of the Western Hockey League. You'll hear scouts talking about a certain draft being a good year for the WHL or the OHL and so on. So, for example, the draft that's coming up, most scouts will tell you is going to be a really good year for the Western Hockey League. There's as many as 9 or 10 kids that legitimately could be first-round picks, depending on how things shake out. It's rare for a league to get that many first-round picks, just on a mathematical basis, but the WHL does seem to be headed for one of those. Year in and year out, it's been remarkably even across the 3 Canadian leagues. The Memorial Cup went through a phase there where it was almost always seeming to be in Quebec. And that would seem to suggest that the Quebec League was at the head of the line. But during that time, you would see more first rounders coming from the WHL and the OHL. You'd see more World Junior players coming from the WHL and the OHL. And yet, despite that, the Quebec League was regularly winning the Memorial Cup. It's hard to put a finger on, and it really comes down to what moment you're at in the cycle, like where each league happens to be. Some birth years are really, really strong. I think you're going to see the 2008 birth year in the Western Hockey League looks incredible when you stack it up next to the other leagues. So when those players are in their prime, the WHL is going to be a very good league. It also kind of depends on who's getting drafted when and where and who's developing how. It's very hard to predict year over year, but I think the leagues are closer to one another than a lot of people think.
Yeah, fair enough. Speaking of WHL and that sort of realm, I'm not sure how focused you're on other teams and players outside of Brandon, but how do you think, or who do you think are some of the best draft eligible players coming out of the WHL this year, heading into the draft?
I'll show my bias and say Roger McQueen's right at the top of the list for me, but I know there's a lot of scouts that are in agreement with me on that one. If, major asterisk, he's healthy, and as I've mentioned a couple times, he's progressing. I think there's good news on that front, which is big because some scouts have made the inevitable parallel between he and Caden Lindstrom and the injuries they're both dealing with. Roger seems to be progressing a little more quickly than Lindstrom is, as far as I know. So Roger will have a chance in the back half of this season here to reestablish himself. But beyond him, I've recently seen Ben Kindle out of Calgary.
Yep.
A lot of skill, great shot, a little bit of a willingness to mix it up. He is no longer what I would call undersized. He was a little small last season, although that didn't seem to slow him down any. But he's probably right around that 6 foot range right now, which is more than big enough for the skilled kind of player that he is. The Wheat Kings have entirely too many times been on the wrong end of a shot by Lyndon Lakovich, and he's fully 6'4" and closing in on 200 pounds. As a late 06, he's got that extra year of development, but he was good last year too, and he's won a championship with Moose Jaw, so he ticks a lot of boxes. As far as defensemen are concerned, Jackson Smith in Tri-City remains the head of the class for me. I really like his game. It is strange to me how few people are talking about Will Sharp in Kelowna. I liked him a lot when he was in Lethbridge. And again, a guy who ticks every box. He's 6'1", 195, so he's not small, skates extremely well, has good vision. And in Kelowna, not only is he getting ice time that he probably wouldn't have got on a Hurricane squad that's loaded on the back end, he's also going to get to play in a Memorial Cup next year. And that's kind of experience he can't really put a dollar value on. So he's, I would go so far as to say, an underrated pick. One guy I have not seen in person is Radim Murtka, the defenseman for the Seattle Thunderbirds. We saw the Thunderbirds in October before he joined that organization. But I mean, he's a 6'5" defenseman who can move. That just makes scouts sit up a little straighter.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about McQueen. Obviously, you're fortunate enough to cover his game and watch him develop. But based off the injuries that he's had to deal with, would you consider that like the hype is still there? And should he be someone to keep an eye on heading into the draft, like in that top 10 range, even maybe top 5?
So right now, if the draft were held right this very second, he's probably not a top 10 pick. The hype has died down just a little bit. But the good news is it increasingly looks like he's going to come back into the lineup with enough time to change that. He's going to get asked questions at the combine. That's inevitable. You miss this much time, scouts are going to have worries. But he's got enough time to bounce back from that, and he's just got such a skill package that's, I think he's got it in him to play his way into the top 10, even the top 5, if scouts are convinced that he's healthy again. How many 6'5", almost 6'6", right shot centermen clicking along at a goal per game do you get a chance at every year?
Yeah. Obviously, I think he's amazing. Last year, he was strong. He stood out to me when I saw Brandon play. Obviously, it sucks that he's injured, but I still think he can be in that top 10 range. Obviously, it's a little more hard to sway people if the draft happened this second and he's been injured for so long, but I think the hype is still there and he deserves it as well. I think he's put in the effort. Moving on, obviously, I have to talk about Carson Bjarnason. I don't think he gets enough credit in the Flyers organization, at least by the fans on that standpoint. You and I both know that the challenges and the volume of shots that he withstands every night. But for those maybe that just look at the stat sheet and call it a night, what do you think Bjarnason truly brings to the table in both Brandon and with his future in Philadelphia?
He's a big kid. He handles shots from the best shooters really well. He mentally bounces back really well if he does happen to have a bad night, and those are increasingly rare. He's been everything the Wheat Kings could have asked of him. He had that stretch after the World Juniors where he's kind of settling back in. Guys come back from the World Juniors, and that was true of some of the skaters as well. Guys come back from that event, and there's an adjustment period as they return. He's past that adjustment period. He's been playing very well lately, and he's a guy that is almost what I would call set it and forget it. Like, you put him in net and you know what you're getting. So he's got the size, he's got the mental acumen, really, really easy kid to be around and work with too. And I think you've experienced that a little bit yourself. I get a feeling that when he gets to Philadelphia, he's going to make himself extremely popular in that city because not only is he good, he's got the right personality to win the fans over.
Yeah, for sure. The connections I've had with him, he's been fantastic. Like, he was a great interview. When I met him, he was so kind to me and my dad. And yeah, he's just a great kid. And I think once fans actually get to see him in that full aspect in Philadelphia, I think that's when people will more appreciate him. Even going back to like training camp this past year or summer, I guess, like, he had not an amazing camp the year prior, but in those like preseason games, he stood out, and he was someone that people were like, oh, maybe he's better than we thought. And obviously with goaltenders, you have to take time, and they develop, and they're still extremely young when you draft them. So obviously that there's a time period there, but I think he's developed really well. And as you mentioned, that World Junior like time from return, I gave him credit for even playing the way he did because he didn't play for Team Canada. He sat in the press box. Like, he didn't see ice other than for practices, but they didn't have very many of those either. And with 3 goaltenders, it's hard to get shots. So yeah, I kind of just let him play a couple more games and saw where he was at again. But yeah, I think he's returned well, and I'm excited to see him play again, I guess in March.
He has been really strong for the Wheat Kings, and they know what they're getting out of him. And it's going to be something. The team is poised to be extremely strong next year. If there is a question mark, it is going to be, what do you do when Carson Bjarnason graduates? Ethan Eskit's been good too. I don't think the team is worried about him. It's just that replacing Carson Bjarnason is a really tall task for any young goaltender. So that'll be something that comes up for sure. But he's on track to be a really solid prospect for the Philadelphia Flyers.
Yeah. And even Eskit too. It's been cool to see him develop. Last year, when I saw him in Red Deer, he was kind of shaky. Obviously, he was really young too. And I was like, well, I don't really know what to think about him, but he moves really well. But he's taken a lot of steps this year as well behind Bjarnason, and he's stepped up when he needed to. So he's another guy that I look towards. He's draft eligible this year, correct?
Yes, he was technically last year as well, and he's in a tough spot on that front because he's a sub-6-foot goaltender, and those don't get a ton of love.
Yeah.
But another really solid kid, actually. The Wheat Kings have a couple of good citizens in that, as well as good goaltenders. And despite being a shorter goaltender, Ethan also sees the ice really well, moves really well post to post. He's a tough goalie to beat on breakaways, I've noticed. The team does give up. It's junior hockey. Every team gives up more than occasional breakaways, but he stays right with shooters in tight and is very hard to beat. So he's been good when the Wheat Kings have needed him.
Yeah, I mean, when I watch goalies, I think especially the smaller ones, they stay well with shooters on breakaways and stuff. Like, not to rehash the Flyers again, but like the Samuel Ersons, he's a smaller goalie, but he's incredible in shootouts. Like, his record's impeccable. And maybe it's because they move quicker and they can react faster than bigger goaltenders. But yeah, I've noticed that a lot too, that those shorter goaltenders can keep up with the shooters in tight and like on those breakaways or even like penalty shots.
And we talked about guys who are going to benefit from the NCAA eligibility. To me, a shorter goaltender gets more benefit out of that than anybody. So in Calgary, for instance, they've got Daniel Hauser right now, who I believe is NCAA committed. And for a guy like that to have 4 more years to develop and wow NHL scouts at the next level is big, because he's been really good in the Western Hockey League for as long as I've been in the league. He started in Winnipeg and was really strong for that Winnipeg Ice juggernaut. And since then, he's been continually good. but he doesn't seem to get a ton of NHL love. Well, give him another 4 years to develop in the NCAA, and we're having a different conversation. And I think you can say that about a lot of goaltenders who might be quote unquote undersized.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to kind of just like normal things. Out of all the arenas you visited throughout the years, which one's your favorite to kind of work in or just like be in?
There's a few really good ones around the WHL, and whether you want to talk the view from the press box, amenities, ease of access, whatever the case may be, there's a lot that tick just about every box. There's one that I wish I got to see more of because I don't unfortunately get there very often, but the Langley Events Center, where the Vancouver Giants play out of, to me hits exactly the right notes for a junior hockey rink. The press box is almost, for my money, the perfect distance from the ice. You're right smack in the middle, so you can see everything. It's a good size. You're probably looking at 5,000 to 6,000 people, which kind of works ideally for junior hockey. And there's a really nice lounge there and a really nice sort of fan interaction area where you can get people together before the game for a live pregame show or after for a live postgame show with the players and coaches. It's very nicely set up. There's a lot of things about that arena that I really like. Within conference, Moose Jaws rink. I know there's been times where the Wheat Kings haven't had much luck there, but it's a really good building. Really fun to work out of. There's not a lot of what I would call duds in the WHL. There's some really good rinks there, but and of course I'm always going to have a soft spot for the rinks that I work in regularly. You know, I worked at the Art Hauser Center for a couple of years. Westoba Place here in Brandon has my heart. So there's a lot of good rinks to work out of. But if I'm going with opposing rinks, I'll say the Moose Jaw Events Center, the Langley Events Center, and I'll give a shout out to Angel of the Winds Arena in Everett, not only for being really easy to work in, but also having unreal atmosphere.
Yeah. Speaking of Everett, I mean, they're great at developing as well. And I'd like to see them more too, but they rarely come out this way. And it's hard to kind of get to see the Landon DuPonts and the Carter Bears of the world. But when I get to, I quite enjoy their like just all around game, their development. They seem like they have a great atmosphere.
I can remember the Bedard effect as it was when he was selling out every building he went to. And I think give it a year or two and Landon DuPont's going to have the same thing. People are going to want to see this kid play. He is dynamite back there. And if you told me that one of the Everett Silvertips defensemen was 15 years old, but you didn't tell me which one, I don't think I would ever guess it was him. No. And that's saying quite something when you got a blue line where Terrence Smith, Eric Jameson, and they've got 3 drafted defensemen back there. You've got guys who are already in NHL, circles, and Landon DuPont doesn't stand out in a negative way at 15 years old. By the time he's 17, he's going to be scary.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough to go to that Connor Bedard game following the World Juniors, and like in the Scotiabank Saddledome, it was just ridiculous. Like the Hitmen don't sell out games anymore unless it's the teddy bear toss game, and it was just packed, and it was just a great game to watch. Like it was ridiculous, the like impact and like the just spark that Bedard brought in his draft year, and like everybody had an eye on him. And I think, like Landon DuPont can have that impact. I watched him a lot at Edge. Edge is like 15 minutes away from my house. So to be able to watch him develop even from younger ages and to now, like it's so impressive to see what potential he has. Obviously it's hard to like put a comp on him already at such a young age, but like he skates like a Cale Makar. Like he has like that impact, the drive, and like you said, it's so hard to tell who that 15-year-old kid would be. Like he just changes the pace of the game.
Right now, the people who know about him are the people in either junior hockey circles or scouting circles. He's not as well known across the hockey world as I'm sure he will be by the end. Again, even Connor Bedard was, it took a couple of years before he became perfectly known in hockey circles. My suspicion is because Bedard, I don't think actually had this opportunity when he was DuPont's age, because it was right around the COVID-19 pandemic. There'll be an opportunity for DuPont to skate in the Hlinka Gretzky Cup this summer. It's usually nationally televised, so you get more eyes on it. It's in the dead of summer, so people who are starved for hockey will gravitate toward it. that has the potential to be a major coming out party for him. He has all the tools to dominate that tournament, and he's going to be part of a blue line that, I touched on the '08 birth year for the Western Hockey League. It is dominated by defensemen. There's good forwards, don't get me wrong. We've got one right here in Brandon and Jackson Jacobson, but the defense class for the 2008 birth year in the WHL is silly good. And between them and Landon DuPont, I would expect a number of players to have kind of a coming out party at the Hlinka Gretzky this summer.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate enough to go to the Hlinka Gretzky Cup when it was at Edmonton. I wish it was in Edmonton every year. It would be so great. I could go every year. But yeah, like that was for sure a tournament where it made me realize like some of these other kids, and it was such a great event to watch all these kids from different parts of the world as well that I never got to see. And yeah, it's a tournament that doesn't gain a lot of traction, but when it's nationally televised and there's talk about it and you have like the Landon DuPonts that are in it, it gravitates people towards it, and it brings more attention to not only the ones that you want to watch, but like other kids that stand out in a certain game or like can make an impact or a difference when you're watching it. And that's kind of what I gathered from it when I was talking to the Caleb Deone and those guys who won the event last year. And yeah, it's just a great tournament to watch the younger kids that are going to be draft eligible. And yeah, I mean, I think if more people were to watch it, you would see more players talked about more regularly.
It's a milestone on the scouting calendar for sure. And because the United States tends not to send their A team to this tournament, they don't send the national team development program, it might not get as much interest south of the border. But that's the one tournament for the under 18 level where Canada will reliably have all of its best players available. The U18s, of course, coincide with the CHL playoffs, so you have no guarantee that the best U18 players in the country are going to be available. So this year, for example, Ben Kindle, I think we can reasonably say, is not going to be available for the U18s. Probably the same is true of Gavin McKenna. There's going to be a lot of guys at that U18 age group who aren't playing in that tournament in April. Whereas the Hlinka Gretzky, you have pretty much everybody available to you. You are sending your best team possible.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to get into your family a little bit. Who has helped you kind of along the way with your career? Obviously, any family, friends. Is there anybody who like kind of inspired you when you were growing up? Like any other play-by-play announcers or like someone that you listened to regularly that kind of made you want to do what you do?
I've been lucky to have extremely supportive, people in my family who've always been in my corner. I've been lucky that way. I joke that my mom and dad have never told me to find a real job, which is really nice. So that's been really, really good. As far as inspirations are concerned, I grew up watching hockey at a time where, Bob Cole was the voice of Saturday night. But the first guy I can remember really idolizing in that way was probably Gord Miller. I was a huge World Junior fan growing up. I remember the first time I watched that tournament, it was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. And Gord Miller's been the voice of that tournament for as long as I've been watching. And it's at the point where I can't imagine anyone else doing it. And he's a guy that definitely inspires my call. There's a few expressions of his that I've unconsciously stolen for sure. And sometimes I'll catch myself doing that and I go, I know where you got that from. You plagiarist. I know where you took that from. He's inspired my call quite a bit in that regard. The colleagues I have in the WHL, though, have maybe had an even bigger impact. When I was relatively young in my career, still working in Junior A in Estevan, I would send my demo reel to different guys further up the food chain. Les Lazaruk is a veteran guy with a ton of experience, and he's universally respected around the league. He was willing to take the time to help me improve. Same with James Gallo and Moose Jaw, Regan Bartel and Kelowna. The Western Hockey League play-by-play group is a pretty tight-knit fraternity, and the fact that I now get to call some of these guys colleagues is really incredible to me because they were all so good to me when I was coming up. They all gave me such good advice, and they never, for even a second, balked at the idea of working with a young play-by-play guy. They were all really good that way. It's a really inclusive fraternity, and I'm lucky to be part of it.
Yeah, you kind of almost need those connections. And it's great to have them as well. I mean, like, hockey for one is like such a small knit group, and it's such a small business to get into. So to like have those connections and those people that, have seen your stuff or can vouch for you and appreciate your work is something like that you almost need to get into the business. Like, you have to have those small connections, and especially the ones that go farther up the food chain. So I mean, that's awesome that the WHL is such a tight knit group, because that's almost what you need to succeed in like the sports business, just even hockey in general.
Absolutely. The hockey world is small. The world of hockey broadcasters is even smaller. And I've not met even one bad person out of the group of broadcasters that I've worked with.
Yeah. Continuing on with kind of your play-by-play and being a broadcaster, are there any perks to working with the Wheat Kings other than kind of watching and calling the best sport in the world every night? But for example, like promotion nights, do you get to get a bobblehead as well with the fans or no?
It's funny you say that. Somewhere in this apartment right now is the Carson Bjarnason bobblehead. So I do have one of those. There are some perks here and there for sure. Team jackets are a weirdly big one. I think in my closet, I've got a winter jacket from every team I've worked with now across different leagues and levels. And I haven't bought a winter jacket in many years because I keep getting them. So that's really nice. And hey, it's Western Canada. You're guaranteed that you're going to need it. So that's a nice aspect. But the perks, I never think about too much. The job is just so much fun that they're only a nice bonus. Well, that and you know what, the free meals. Go on the road team getting the free meals. That's not so bad.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's kind of just rewarding to even work in hockey, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's funny you mentioned the Carson Bjarnason bobblehead. I remember when it came out, like that it was going to be announced or whatever. And it's funny enough that Ron Hextall is the only other goalie too, another Flyer. But my dad's been trying to hunt one down for like months now. And his buddy kind of finally got him one. I think it's on the way now. But yeah, we've been hunting one down for like the past months because it's so hard to get them. But yeah, he's got like the whole collection. He's got the Ron Hextall one. He's got the Carson Bjarnason one. But yeah, maybe that's telling for what Carson will be. Since you mentioned your clothing and stuff, I know you're a man of many suits. How many do you have in the collection now, suit and ties combined?
Oh, geez. So I got 4 what I would call suits, 4 sport coats. I could probably stand to expand that wardrobe, actually. Ties, I have lost count. I have 2 hangers full of them, and I'll go into Moores or somewhere and be like, oh, I like that tie. And then I've got to tell myself, no, we have more than we need already. We have ties at home. Get out of there without breaking bank. And last time I walked into Moores, they were on sale, and I walked out with 3 of them. So there's just a whole section of my closet devoted to that stuff.
Yeah. Just a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up. But do you have kind of a favorite matchup to cover in the WHL? I know obviously teams play each other so many times, and like you're traveling so much, and you play probably 4 times in a week, and like there's a lot of back-to-backs and a lot of moments where it's kind of just hits you really quick. But is there a certain team that you enjoy calling, or there's a more close rivalry than some may think that you enjoy to watch?
I'm not even going to pretend not to be biased here, but the Wheat Kings and Raiders have not only a really nasty rivalry, and not only do I still know players on both teams, it's genuinely good hockey when those teams meet. I think even when I was with the Raiders, for the last 4 years I've been in the league, I don't think those 2 teams have played one boring hockey game, and they've played 30-plus games in that time. It's crazy how close that rivalry has been for 2 teams that are 7 hours apart from each other via travel. You wouldn't think they would be each other's biggest rival. And yet, in terms of the results, because I know the Raiders have a really close rivalry with Saskatoon, it's natural. They're an hour and change up the road from each other. But as far as the results are concerned, where they are in the standings, where they've been in their respective windows to win, and how they've both kind of built up to the same competitive window at the same time, I think that's the biggest rivalry in the East Division. And it's bearing out right now as those 2 teams fight for top spot in the East Division. Every game they play against each other has a playoff feel to it. It's always fun. At times, it borders on vicious. Those 2 teams go at each other tooth and nail. And it's so funny to see, because they know each other too, a lot of them do. It's so funny to see two of the biggest competitors who would cheerfully run one another over during the game, standing around after the game chatting. It's such a strange feeling. And again, because I know guys on both sides, it's even stranger. But it is genuinely fun hockey to watch, and it's ultra competitive. And after every game between these two teams, I think the same thing. Give me 7 games of this. I'd call that cheerfully.
Yeah, and you almost want that competitiveness as well. It makes things more exciting for fans, obviously, probably for you as well to call something like that. Those kind of just back and forth games that have like a lot of excitement, big hits, big goals, like those. That's something you obviously want to call, and that's a game you want to be a part of. Playoffs are a big thing as well. Do you have a favorite playoff series that you've covered? I mean, I'm not sure how many playoff games you've covered. I can't. Brandon didn't make it last year.
I didn't make it very far last year. They
Yeah.
ran into the eventual champion Moose Jaw
Oh,
Warriors.
yes, and they got swept. Yeah.
Yeah. And my first year in the league was Prince Albert played Winnipeg. So it was nice to be back in Winnipeg for a little bit. But that also wasn't a particularly long series. So if you want the best series I've called, I've got to go back to my junior A days for that one when I was with the Estevan Bruins. I was spoiled there. In my very first year, we went to Game 7 of the finals. And oddly enough, I don't know if the final series that year could be my favorite series. And the reason for that is, you cast your mind back, you remember that 2017-18 season was the year of the Humboldt Broncos bus crash. And the final between the Bruins and Hawks happened after the crash, and there was some talk of whether the series would ever happen. In terms of the hockey itself, that 7-game series was incredible, and I wish I could bottle it. The circumstances around it, it was so solemn, and there was such a sadness around the games. There was a unity for sure. It was the moment where the hockey world felt like the most connected community I've ever been part of. But it felt at times like a very strange dream. Those 2 weeks after the crash and with the series were probably the strangest 2 weeks in so many ways that I've ever been part of in the hockey world. It was almost like living in almost a nightmare. Sometimes you have those dreams where something is wrong. Something is not quite right. Everything seems normal, but you can tell something is not right. Yeah. Well, this was one of those dreams where you knew what wasn't right. You knew that 16 people should have been there watching that series unfold. 16 people still should have been with us. And it was strange to go through that. So as far as the hockey was concerned, yeah, that 7-game series for the finals would have to be it. It was crazy hockey, and there was so much emotion around it. But it's hard to call that one a favorite.
Yeah. It's kind of just like everything stops for a bit. Obviously, in recent the months, like Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew, like everyone just came together, and it was like such a shocking moment. Like everything stopped, and to see the unity of like both Calgary and Columbus, and coming out and supporting just the family as a whole, and like bringing everything to the respective arenas, like it's hard to like. It's just hard to talk about, and like that just connection that everyone has for a moment in time, and even like months after. Like we talk about Humboldt all the time, and like it's an anniversary that obviously it's sad, but we have to celebrate as well, because those were 16 young men that like lost their lives, but we appreciate what they did for the game, and obviously we have to honor them as well as like the brothers as well now. Like that's just going to be a yearly thing that everyone talks about and connects with. And you'll always remember it in good spirits, but also in bad. Like it's a sad thing to think about, but it's just hard to not like speak about or like honestly honor as well.
It was a moment where people refer to moments where they remember exactly where they were and what they were doing when they got the news. I suspect I will remember April 6, 2018 and everything that happened around it for the rest of my life. I did have some connections with that group because I had worked a little bit with the Broncos that year. And I think I will remember exactly where I was and what I was doing when the news came down. somewhere on my phone. I might even still have the text I got from our assistant coach in Estevan, Aaron Miller, who was the first to bring us the news. And it was a day of shock for the entire hockey world. And I don't think it ever will or will ever deserve to be forgotten.
Yeah. Moving in, it's hard to kind of move on from something like that, but do you have any advice for people like trying to get into the business? Because obviously, like we said, it's a small one. Just getting into the sports business, or someone that wants to get into play-by-play?
For play-by-play specifically, the biggest thing for a young play-by-play announcer is reps. It's the kind of thing you can only get better at by doing. If you're practicing play-by-play, you're doing play-by-play. So find a way to do it. Build your catalog of call and discover what you like about your call and what you don't, because a lot of play-by-play is almost subconscious. You can't really think about what you're saying as you say it. As soon as you slow down to think, the game has passed you by. So it's a very almost unconscious skill set. And you only develop that kind of skill set by practicing. So find a way to get reps in, whether that's calling a game for your local AAA team. That's a good way to do it. USports was for me the gateway, but I also did some work with a local junior B team, a little bit with junior A in Winnipeg. There's almost always some hockey somewhere that is lacking dedicated coverage, that is still good enough hockey to develop your skill set. So, for example, I know you're in Alberta. I don't know what the junior B scene is like in the major cities in Alberta, but I'm sure you can find, whether it's junior B, hockey academies, AAA, junior A, something, or USports like I did. The other piece of advice I would give a young play-by-play announcer, get there early enough to do play-by-play, and I still do this, do play-by-play of the warm-up. That's a good way to tell what, if any, players are giving you problems with pronunciation, what, if any, players, for whatever reason, their number doesn't quite stick in your mind. There's always one. There's always one player on a team where, for whatever reason, you need a little more mental effort to match up their name and number. And you can get that out of your system in a warm-up, and no one will ever know. There's been games for sure where in my prep leading up to the game, I've had one number in particular that for whatever reason just doesn't click with me as far as being associated with that name. I get that out of my system in the warm-up, and by the time we're on air and the puck is dropped, nobody would ever know it was giving me trouble. So practice a lot, get your reps in, and do play-by-play of the warm-up.
Yeah. I was, so with our college, or I guess university, whatever you want to call it, there's a lady that like sends us emails about like availability for like things to cover, which is really nice. So our junior B scene's pretty good, especially Okotoks. Like they're really competitive. They're always really good. But she sent out an email about Airdrie needing a play-by-play announcer, like Airdrie Thunder. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll try it. Like, it didn't stick very well, but I tried it, and I thought it was like one of the hardest things in the world. Like, it was like, obviously it was my first ever time. Like, things didn't obviously go that well. It was hard to like prepare for something like that. And obviously as a kid, when you're playing NHL or watching a hockey game, you can do play-by-play, but you also know the players that are on the ice. So yeah. I did as much prep as I could. Like I had a week to prep. I'm like trying to like do this stuff, and like everything didn't go right. Like the setup didn't go right. My audio was messed up. But I just remember it being like so difficult to keep up. Like you said, like if you take a second to think about something, you're lost. Like the puck's already moved to another guy, or like a puck's in the other end, or something's already happened. So I don't think play-by-play is for me. Obviously, I'd have to keep trying it to see if it would, but it wasn't something I really considered doing, but it was something I was like, okay, I'll try it. But now two of my other buddies that go to the school, they're usually on the podcast with me. They do it now, and having both of them together, one's kind of like color, one's more play-by-play, but they've connected really well. And I thought they do a great job. But yeah, they've obviously had more reps now and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was really difficult to like even keep up with. Like I was trying to jot down numbers and stats. Like it was so hard to like keep up with. So I don't think it's for me, but I can definitely see how some people would enjoy it or obviously would like to make a career out of it.
You can only learn that you like it by doing it. That was how I learned I liked it, and it's fun once you're into it. And when you start, there's inevitably going to be stumbles. You can only improve by doing it more often. But I will say a lot of creative industries, whether it's writing or videography, photography, whatever it is, you'll get occasionally people outside the industry, usually people jealous of the job, who will say, "Well, I can do what you do." I got to tell you, as a play-by-play announcer, no one has ever told me that. No one has ever said, "Wow, I could do that. It's easy." I think it's an unspoken truth of the job that not everybody can do that, and a lot of people, the first time they try, find out how tricky it really is and how much actually goes into a broadcast. And as fun as it is, I don't. It's so fun that I almost never think of it as a difficult job. A lot of people will tell me that they view it as objectively difficult, which kind of makes me a little smug, and I don't need that. But it is a fun line of work.
Yeah, I think you do a great job. Me and my dad, when we get to watch the Brandon games, I think we both enjoy your coverage very well. But I mean, yeah, like I can write, I can talk to people, I can do interviews and stuff. Like I can host a podcast, but like play by play is just another animal of speaking and being quick on your toes. And like, it's just another realm that I'll greatly appreciate now, especially that I've tried to do it at least. Like it's something that I think takes a lot of talent and a lot of time and a lot of preparation. I know you write as well. How did that kind of come about, writing kind of more updates or like previews or like game recaps and that sort of thing, even beyond Brandon? Have you always kind of written, or is that something that kind of just started?
I've done a lot of writing over the years. It was something that, because when I started in journalism school, I wasn't 100% sure play-by-play was going to be an option. So I had been writing at that time for sure. I think I was with the hockey writers for a couple of years there, back when I was in college, and I did some stuff for Jets Nation and so forth. And I've always enjoyed writing, but as far as game recaps and the like go, it kind of goes hand in hand with the play-by-play job. I did the most writing I've ever done. Was when I was in Estevan. We were in a very, very small newsroom. It was me and one other guy, so about as small as it gets. And at the time I was getting into news there, it was immediately pre-pandemic. And then, of course, March of 2020 hits, and all of a sudden, oh, there is news. There is a ton of news. And I was writing, by the time I finished up in Estevan in 2021, I was writing 40 stories a week. Yeah. So like anything, it's something that you get better at with practice. And boy, did I get practice while I was there. It's always been part of my repertoire, but I think that time gave me the most, as I said earlier, reps that I've ever had.
Yeah, I can't imagine, like, because usually there's like, obviously in the NHL, you have like a play-by-play announcer, and then you have X amount of journalists and writers and stuff that are in the press box doing that themselves. So I can't imagine having to do play-by-play and then recap the game or write a completely new story, like basically just write what you announced for 2.5 hours already. So when is the time that you really write? Like, is it immediately after the game on like the bus, or like when do you find that time to sit down and write a piece?
So there's always an expectation in sports of writing to deadline. One thing that journalism instructors and journalists will tell you is if you want to get a journalist really good at writing to deadline, whatever they're covering, get them to write sports, because that is a to-the-minute deadline. And what I'll end up doing is, there'll be a couple minutes of commercial break in the intermissions. I'll write up the goals from that period in the intermissions. And then once I'm finished interviewing the head coach or the assistant coach, whoever comes up with the post-game show, I'll throw parts of that interview into the post-game write-up. But a lot of the post-game write-up is written before the post-game. And a lot of journalists in the sports sphere will practice that as well. If you're up in the press box, you'll see guys typing away after every goal, describing what they've seen, because by the time the game is over and they've collected quotes from players and coaches, deadline is fast approaching, and they do not have time to rifle through their previous game notes and do everything from scratch. So a lot of it is done during the game.
Yeah. When I was at the Gretzky Cup, like, obviously I didn't do a lot of writing. I was more there to like just scout and kind of sink in the moment for my first time, really like scouting and being in that environment. But I'm not sure if you know like Stephen Ellis and like Cam Robinson and those guys, like
All those guys.
sitting near them and like just seeing what they do, like they're on the ball like immediate, like throughout the whole game. Like Ellis is writing notes on every player, like he does his top 10 like most noticeable players. Robinson like scouts like every individual player because he's elite prospects. Like those guys, like they are right to the minute, like you said, like they're writing after every goal, after every hit. Like it's amazing to watch. And yeah, I'm very old school in a way. Like I still write things a lot. So the way I kind of did it, I kind of just had like a notebook in front of me and I was kind of just enjoying it and scouting and stuff. Like, so I was just writing notes, but obviously I can see why a lot more people physically write like while watching the game. But like, yeah, Stephen Ellis had like a whole document and it had every player on it and he had to write every note for every player. I'm like, this is incredible. Like it was amazing to watch.
And you have to do it in the moment because it's amazing with so much happening in a hockey game. It's amazing what you forget. The number of times I'll be watching a period set of highlights after I've just finished calling the period, and I thought to myself, "Oh, that's right, that happened. One of our guys had a post in this period." You almost forget. I'll say on that note, Cam Robinson and Stephen Ellis, both well worth following on social media, but those two guys, the way they covered the game, do a ton for junior hockey. And I appreciate it like crazy because you get those tournaments like the U17s and the Hlinka Gretzky that don't always get the same level of spotlight. And when I want to know about a prospect, or when I want to know how one of the Wheat Kings is doing at one of those tournaments, those are two guys that I'll turn to, and they are doing good, solid work that a lot of us in the junior hockey business appreciate.
Yeah, they're like everywhere, like every tournament, every even small tournament like the U17s and stuff, like they go everywhere. And like I appreciate the commitment. Like it's ridiculous the travel they do on their own.
Even the photos, that was a big one. When I was posting articles, if I needed, because of course I can't, travel to Sarnia in the middle of the season for the U17s because the Wheat King season is still going. And if I need a picture of, say, Gio Pantelis with Team Canada, Steven's got one.
Yeah. Speaking of his like photography and stuff too, I watched that as well. Like he would run down to the ice, take photos, run back up, put them on his computer, edit them, then write. Like he did everything. It was incredible.
Surprisingly physical line of work.
Yeah, you got a lot of reps in going upstairs. I think that's all I have for you. I greatly appreciate your time. Yeah, it was great talking to you.
Well, thanks for reaching out and for having me on.
Of course. Thank you for your time.
No problem.
Talk soon.
Talk soon, Dylan.
Bye.
Bye-bye.